And hello, everybody. Welcome back for another episode, If Not Now Wen. In today's show, I am so excited to have my friend, Nick Spiller, join us today. Nick is a venture principal for Capital Factory. He's a veteran for the Texas startup ecosystem and the biggest startup supporters. Most of his days spending to help founders through raising the capital. And as a venture principal, he worked at the most active seed-stage venture capital fund in Texas, Capital Factory. Today, through Capital Factory, they help over 750 portfolio companies raising billions in venture capital, plus over $500 million in non-dilutive funding from defense and government innovation groups. He's super passionate about creating an inclusive startup ecosystem in Austin and the world. With that, everybody, please join me to welcome Nick to the show. Thank you so much, Nick, for joining us today. We are so excited to have you.
Thanks for having me, Wen.
Yeah. So tell us, Nick, how does all that start for you?
Well, I grew up in a small town outside of Flint, Michigan, in the Midwest. I graduated high school in the midst of the financial crisis in 2009. And long story short, the best school I got into is the University of Texas at Austin. And I moved down sight unseen, and that coincidentally happened to be the year that my boss now, Joshua Baer, was founding Capital Factory, and it was also 1 year before Dr. Bob Metcalf, the inventor of Ethernet, moved to Austin and became the professor of innovation. And Dr. Metcalf and Joshua Baer teamed up to start a class, which is now called Longhorn Startup. And I was a student entrepreneur in that course the first year they held it. And I'm still involved in that course today as a mentor. I'm going there this afternoon.
Wow, that's all that come together.
That was the beginning, yes. And it was great timing on my part, and really just showed up to help and see, how I could assist in this vision of making Austin a better Silicon Valley.
Yeah, and why that interest to you, Nick?
Yeah, well, growing up outside of Flint, it's quite opposite than the economic environment we benefit from here in Austin. Today, for sure, and even in 2009 when I moved here, Flint is the birthplace of General Motors. And in the 50s, it was the fastest growing city in the United States. It was built on one industry, though, and that was the automotive industry. And over time, those jobs ended up going overseas and really left this struggling economy with high unemployment, significant crime. And when I was going to college, I wanted to really figure out how to fix that. Why is that? That was a big question on my mind. In fact, that's what I wrote about when I applied to the University of Texas in my essay. And it was, why is Austin thriving through this recession, from an economic standpoint, and what could come, back to Flint to revitalize our economy there. And so, it did not take long living in Austin to realize the answer to that question was entrepreneurship, technology, and innovation.
Wow. And I know today you are such a veteran, right, for startup ecosystem in Austin and beyond. Why do you have such a strong belief in Austin and also specifically entrepreneurship with that?
Well, when it comes to my career in startups in Austin, it's built on the idea that Silicon Valley needed to expand. And
tell us more.
Silicon Valley is a very unique place, and there's been more wealth created there than really anywhere in the history of time. And there's only so many people and so many billion-dollar companies you can build in one city, one geographic area. And I think Silicon Valley has been distributing itself across the United States and even beyond our borders for quite some time. And that's really kicked in here the last few years, the last 10 years. When I moved here in 2009, there was a large migration to Texas from the Midwest. I was part of that, and there's a lot of other people who were moving here, and there was this early inklings of this coastal migration here. And I'm not saying Austin is replacing San Francisco or New York as the hub. I'm saying it's spreading out, and that Austin is simply the leading alternative to those markets. And you see startup ecosystems popping up in almost everywhere across the country now. And that's what I mean about Silicon Valley expanding itself. And it's been obvious here that Austin's had a head start building our ecosystem. That and Austin is no stranger to technology. With our own similar background, to Silicon Valley with some Department of Defense work here. In the 70s, 80s, IBM moving here, some early companies, Dell, Trilogy, Tivoli, and there's MCC, the Microcomputing Electronics Consortium, moved to Austin in the 80s. And so there was a lot of groundwork that was laid here for the tech ecosystem. They're just, we hadn't hit our prime yet. There weren't these billion-dollar companies that had transformed the face of the earth that Silicon Valley had, but you could see the trend was our friend, and I figured I'd hang out and see how I could help.
Yeah, and it's quite incredible. You had that vision in 2009. Do you always see that?
No, I didn't have any vision in 2009. I barely was coherent. It feels like coming out of college, or high school, and all the shenanigans in college. But Dr. Bob Metcalf had a vision, and Joshua Bayer had a vision. I was lucky enough to glimpse that through showing up to an event and listening to a panel and a keynote, and I just knew that I could connect people at the end of the day, and that I could play a role because Josh and Dr. Metcalf are busy people. They need a lot of help. There wasn't a lot of infrastructure on campus, or they didn't have big teams helping them do this at the time. They had small teams, and so I was able to step up and literally do things like fold clothes in the swag closet at Capital Factory in the early days. And I did that, so I got a VIP pass to the startup crawl, or got into an event, or there's ways to just help out. And and most lasting way to help out was to get the student body involved, and with Dr. Metcalf and Josh's support, I was able to rally a group of student leaders to create the Longhorn Entrepreneurship Agency and Student Government. Wow. And that is really still around today, and what the organization that resulted from a lot of those early activities that I was a part of.
I love that. I love that. And you are not only, really having that passion to help, but really recognizing the thought leader early on, really saying yes to their vision, their impact to the world, and help you see the impact you create today. People
get very focused on the visionary, and because it's fascinating, and that's why we make movies and watch movies about people like Steve Jobs and Elon Musk. But what I've noticed is that there's far more people who are not founders and are not visionaries involved in startups.
That's equally important.
Right. And I actually think it's far more important is that the people know how to help those with a vision. And that's where 90% of the work is done by people on the ground who, get very little credit relative to, the picture of a founder and the reputation of a founder. And I'm not trying to take anything away from that. I think there's a big reason we celebrate the founders, and it's a cultural beacon. But most people in startups are not founders.
Yeah, that's a great distinction there, because I think you're right. A lot of those kudos and lights going to those visionaries, and they are wonderful. They are one of the kind. But I really believe that it takes a village rising up, especially in the startup ecosystems. And in my personal belief, I think there are kind of three types of person. I think we kind of speaking of that before is, of course, you having that visionary, as I call it, the top of the triangle, who are, can see something from nothing and having that brilliant idea from left to right, which is amazing and wonderful. That's their gift. But you also have to have, I call it the operational geniuses, where he thrive or she thrive on systems, structures. If you said, Nick, I'm going to the moon, I said, great one. There are 3 steps. 1, 2, 3, that's how we arrive to the moon. So that is the gift that I call it operational geniuses they brought on the table. Right. Last but not least, we also have someone I call it the people leader. He or she thrive in people. He or she thrive in community. He or she thrive on sharing their vision with the world. So if you take a step back, think about those 3 triangles, right? One person here as a visionary said, okay, guys, we are going to the moon. Great. Now the operational genius said, brilliant. There are 3 steps. We're going to do 1, 2, 3. We're going to get there in XYZ times. Now the people leader are going to take that vision, take that ideas to now share that with the entire world. Guys, at organization ABC, this is what we do. Love to have you join us in this mission. Right. So if you think about that 3 triangle, it really completes the entire team. And I love what you said about, the visionary actually is a quote-unquote minority, nor good or bad. It's more like a 3-leg stool almost. You have to have both to stand on.
Right. And reinforcement of those legs that you're standing on. Do you think that one person could play 2 or 3 of those?
100%. Yeah. So, typically speaking, once again, we are so generalizing here, which I don't like that because no one is a box. So we all so different. But generally speaking, any individuals will have one that's predominantly and usually have 1 or 2. So for example, I'm going to see myself. I know I am the people leader. That's just someone that, I thrive with the leader, with the people, with connection. But also I'm not visionary in my own mind. I understand what vision I want to create for the world I'm creating. But once again, it's not there's no one tree is better than another. It's just what we naturally gravitate to. And therefore it is important whether it's a partnership or a friendship or a team or the group, we want to make sure find the right partner that really complement us from different angles. So from that, I'm going to throw the question back to you, Nick. What do you think, just by a first step on it, what do you think is your a primary driver or maybe secondary or third?
Well, I want to know what you think. What do you think I am?
Well, first of all, we do be friends for sometimes. But I want to also preface this on this. The more experienced people get in life, people get more well-rounded. Yeah. So people could, I'm speaking this for myself, I could start with as a people leader, for example, after, being started up in corporate, getting MBA, all the fancy things. I understand structure, understand how things work, but it's not going to be what I love to do, but I can be organized. So really, this is not about a strength or weakness kind of thing. It's more like what is your natural strengths. Maybe that's, I want to put it that way. What do you like versus you're good at?
I think I'm also a people person.
I was just going to say it. It's pretty obvious to me that you always that I see you as a people leader in a startup community. You rally everyone around and create all the what is event assignments, showcase all the best of technology. I think you are this. I don't want to say it's cheerleader because I feel like a put down, but you are this biggest advocate behind those innovation and startups.
I agree, and bringing people together and someone has to get the tribe excited and communicate to the group in unison. But what I've really tried to do is use my natural gift for people to become a dynamic leader who can really play all 3 of those roles. And today I look at what you just described as very situational more than a team building thing. And it's like, what is my situation on this team and this project in this moment? And, really being able to step up in either one of those roles based on what's needed. And I do feel like I have a little bit of a vision now for Texas. And certainly, probably that's, I like to let my vision shine through the people I work with and make my friends famous. And I do, and just by, I've learned the hard way on ops, the 1, 2, 3, how do you go do it question. And I've, because I was not technical nor anything special, I had to start in startups in operations. And when I got my first job at Favors, I was at Favor Delivery, it was operations manager, and I was delivering, anything, food usually, from a restaurant, and we were doing it, a couple hundred times a day or sometimes a couple thousand times a day across the company. And so
that's insane. The math.
Yeah. It's a lot. It's a lot. It's the operation, right? And if you do it right, it doesn't feel too hard. And the growth doesn't hurt. And certainly Capital Factory is unique in that I am investing in startups out of our fund and working with them as an advisor, but we have a big operation and a 75-person team that I also help manage, and it's quite complex as well. So I think it's like you kind of what is your natural, answer to that? What is your natural leader type? And then, how do you use that to develop those other areas so you're well-rounded?
Yeah, no, it's brilliant said because I think at the end of the day, you and me, we are all, everybody, we all wear multiple hats in different scenarios, and there are different situations call us a different strengths forward. But once again, the more experience we have, the more well-rounded we naturally become. But there are still differentiations between what we really love to do versus I can be good at it, but I might not love to do. For me, I know it's spreadsheet. I understand it, I can read it, but please don't put me build a pivot table for the love of God, don't put me in that task.
Yeah.
But if I have to do it, I will. So I think there's just a how to best use of time.
Yeah.
That's why we do put it.
Yeah.
What brings us joy?
At the end of the day, it is a job, and jobs are jobs because there are unfun parts, and it is nice to have fun at work, but it's not always going to be fun. And you gotta, kind of just be able to buckle in and focus on those things that you don't want to do. And the more you're able to put it in practice, flex that muscle, the easier it gets. And soon enough, it's not even a big deal.
Yeah, and I think that applies a lot for the entrepreneurs, especially in the early stage.
The most for entrepreneurs.
Maybe one, maybe two person, maybe not even that, just 2 or 3, if they're lucky, they got a well-rounded, diverse, skill set, or maybe not in the first beginning, right?
Right.
So the founder has to do the part that maybe quote unquote unfun, like you said, and you are 100% right. Oftentimes, when you think about it, it's never just about you and me; it's about the bigger vision. And we can focus on the big picture, right? Those fun part could be fun in the process of it.
Such an important point in that the founders have to be more adaptable than anybody, and they need to be willing to do any job at any stage. And it's we always should remind ourselves that founder is a status, not a job.
What a quote! I love that.
Yes, and it's not even a job title, really. It's
status.
It's very CEO is a job.
Yeah.
CTO is a job. Like people don't get a salary for being a founder; they get equity, and it's a very special role, but it's not a job. And the role, and often the founder does have the job of CEO or CTO or a different executive level job. But the interesting thing that you get to see working across companies of all stages is the job of the CEO in the early stages is vastly different than the job of the CEO at the late stage. And really, the tough part is you spend all this time solving these problems, becoming a leader at the seed phase or, after your Series A. And then once you figure that all out, you got to level up and the problem set completely changes. And as soon, and it's just like a video game. It's I finally figured it out, but guess what? Level up, you got to go do something completely different. It's not about getting from, 100,000 to 1 million. It's about getting 1 million to 5 million. It's not about, then it's 5 million to 20 million. And it's, it's way different to lead a 20-person team than a 50-person team, than a 500-person team, and the management layers. And so, the reality is that companies grow faster than people, and founders, a lot of good founders have to hire people to do these executive jobs while they find other jobs within the organization or move on to their next job, their next startup, or something else, and we'll always be the founder of that company. You can't. That's kind of the point of it. It's jobs you can take away, and that's an accountable. There's accountability, but you can't can't make someone not the founder.
What a great insight, Nick. Because I think you are such a veteran in the startup scenes, and you've seen it all, right? From different kind of vertical. Different type of founder, different kind of strengths, all in above. And what you share is so interesting because I think a lot of founders, when they find that status the first place, he actually might not even anticipate that in the next, XYZ years. And I'm curious, as a founder listening to this show, what are some, I don't want to say blind spot, but what are something that maybe surprised founder before he actually step into that role? Because what you said, one thing that probably not even commonly be anticipated.
Well, one easy thing is on your business card, your email signature, you should be putting CEO before founder. And just to my perspective, knowing that founder is a status, not a role, is that when the founder puts founder first, that means that is where their head's at, and that's what they're prioritizing, and it's not this CEO mentality, which is different. And I do feel like 80% of founders put founder and CEO. And I'm not saying this is a hard and fast rule, but if you go look at well-funded companies, like their CEOs will be putting CEO only, and they won't be putting founders, even if they may put founders after. So there's the broader point is there's a lot of nuances of how you present yourself that investors begin to pick up on, and I'm not saying any of it's a deal breaker whatsoever, but it's certainly something. If I see that, I'm like, okay, there's a little maturing, that I would like to see, most likely there, and I don't think it effectually damages anybody, and I don't think this is a widespread belief, but it is something that I've always thought of, and it's something that someone I mentioned multiple times on the call, Dr. Metcalf, shared with me originally, and pointed out.
What Dr. Metcalf inspired you the most, Nick? Because you have such a, I don't want to say privileges, but you have such a interesting time spending with him in a very intimate setting, in a very early on.
I'm very, very fortunate, and was one of the first students to meet Dr. Metcalf when he came to University of Texas. And for those of you who don't know him, he is the inventor of Ethernet. Started a company called 3Com that became a unicorn in Silicon Valley and established the internet as we know it. And he's been a venture capitalist, a publisher, and spent 10 years at the University of Texas at Austin as professor of innovation. And I went to one of the first events he spoke at when he got that job. And what inspired me the most is when he said his mission at UT is to make our student entrepreneurs as supported and celebrated as our student athletes. Right? Which ties directly back to my earlier comment about there being more people who support founders than there are founders themselves. And the lifeblood of our magnificent athletics program at the University of Texas is not, the athletes are critical, but it is about the fans, and it's about the alumni. It's about the 100,000 people that show up to watch people play a game, right? And all of that. And so, and that's the true, way to build a startup ecosystem is to actually figure out how you get the people around the founders to be more founder friendly, and you might find versus having founder centric problems like, oh, this founder needs to raise money faster. Well, maybe there's things we can do from an ecosystem level to make the funding more accessible, or make the funding process more equitable. Whatever it may be. But yeah, I think it's we want our entrepreneurs to be as supported as our athletes. And the second less collegial thing that inspired me was his mission to make Austin a better Silicon Valley, and he started that in 2011, and I think we're well on our way, if not already there.
And now you take the pecan over.
Yeah, I would say there's a whole army of people who've taken the baton.
But still, you're one of the one that really, once again, it's not about everyone leading, it's we all leading together forward, right? But today, being the venture principals at Capital Factory, the center of gravity to Austin, but entire Texas startup ecosystems, your voice, your perspective have a huge gravity there.
I've been a witness to it all, and I witness, and I intend to stay alive as long as I can to come on podcast and talk about it and share the story.
You're so humble, Nick. I mean, you've done a lot. You rallied so many incredible people together to celebrate those amazing, innovation and achievements. But yeah, I feel like you are such a humble leadership to really shed the light on all those amazing people. And yeah, really set the groundwork for everyone to rise up together.
Yeah. Well, you ultimately find it's far more powerful to make the people around you grow than you, because there's more people around you than there are you. So there's far more growth at stake. And this, again, not to harp
Yeah.
on Dr. Metcalf, but Metcalf's law, right? And the more nodes in your network, the more powerful your network. And so, that's a view I developed early on. And it works. And I think it's, you make your friends famous. I mean, it's worth it in and of itself.
Yeah, and I think that's why, Nick, you are so well loved in the startup ecosystem, the community, and all and above. So,
well, thank you.
Incredible job. But with that, let's talk about investment. Let's talk about fundable, right?
Right.
I know today you spend most of your times supporting and helping those founders to get capital. Tell us about that process.
Yeah, well, it makes it really confusing to know if founders really love me or they just want to meet investors. So I appreciate you saying that.
All and above.
And
yes and yes.
And I love the founders who are just trying to get investors, and I don't need them to love me, and a lot of times it's easier if they don't. Well, and I just say that, and that, like, what I've learned is it's, when you build an emotional relationship with someone, you feel obligated. And as a connector, my obligation in that sense makes zero impact on the value of the connections that I can make. And it actually biases my decisions on which connections I can make. And so, and so it actually is far easier for me to look at these on paper, and certain, and I, interact with the founders, but I'm frankly a fan of developing a personal relationship after I've gotten them a 6 or 7 figure investor. And that's the great time. And if I can, like, meet you for the first time, like, outside of work for a drink and develop a relationship to celebrate the funding, that's my goal. And and ultimately, what's unique about what we do at Capital Factory and my team is the scale at which we do this.
How does it work?
And at any one time, we probably have about 100 companies that are raising money in the marketplace, and more probably that we don't even know about. And we have an investor relations team who has a Asana project with every one of those rounds documented, with direct information from the founders, and a very clear process for supplementing and really, in a lot of cases, launching the funding rounds for those founders. And every day, probably as we speak, we're chipping away at that, and one company at a time. And what is critical to make that work on the front end is that the companies are well vetted, and we know what our investor network wants. We kind of filter around that when we're engaging companies for our advisory program, and then we have direct data from over 1,000 VCs and angels that we have relationships with, that have understand Capital Factory, we've invested in, they've came to our events. They've they filled out a form that we gave them with our data on what they invest in, and we only share deals that fit that. And it's the founders basically work with our team to develop their profile and using the same tagging system and all that. So we're able to use a very data-centric approach to curating this full list of 1,000 investors, whereas as an individual, I can't process that many potential connections. Take a lot of brain power if I did. So it's like, okay, project management, getting this data flow and the curation, data-driven curation process down. And then if you're only sharing good deals with investors, or and good is a subjective term. Let's just say you're only sharing deals that fit the criteria the investors gave you on paper or on the form, then you're doing the investor's job for them, and you've created a really good service, and we become pen pals with these investors. And there's these investors all over the world that we send deals to, and they respond, and we have little conversations, and every day, there's 10, 20 of those conversations, and a few of us on the team that manage these campaigns, and that's just a really effective way to build a relationship with an investor and add value. And if 1 in 10 of those becomes an investment, that's a home run. And, in reality, it might be 1 in 20, 1 in 30. And, the point is we're delivering on the most number of potential connections in the network, and doing it in a way where we're making hundreds of connections a week, and and we're not spamming investors, and we're keeping them engaged, and it's I don't know if that might sound like chaotic, and it is, but we make it work.
Wow, what a massive project to rebuild a connection in a meaningful way and establish a network globally. And let's talk about startup, because I know today, Nick, you not only connect with all the incredible men and women from all over the world want to invest in those right technology, but you also personally support, advise, and mentor many of those amazing founders. And in your perspective, right, what are fundable startups? What are the startups that have, I don't want to say most potential, because everyone have amazing potential, but when we think about funding aspect.
Yeah, well, maybe start by what's not fundable.
Okay, what is not, yes.
Easier, or at least,
yes.
What is not going to be the next unicorn, right? Well, certainly it's not the last unicorn.
Okay.
Right. And I think this is the biggest, right? I think one of the biggest things people do, and I'm not saying there aren't patterns to key in on.
Tell us about pattern. I'm very curious about that.
Well, VCs are built on patterns, and we see a lot of deals, and there's no true equation, or there's not a financial history to evaluate, and so there's a lot of patterns, and like the job title pattern is just one that I mentioned, and just seeing they put in founder first, CEO first, and there's 1,000 of those probably that we pick up on, just soft things. And a lot of them I'm probably not even aware of.
Tell us a couple big ones.
A couple big ones. Well,
that's unfundable.
Like the biggest thing that's unfundable is uncoachability. And it's and especially if you're not coachable and you're not like charming or super genius or have like some redeeming factor for being kind of an a-hole, right? Like
oh my God,
a-holes like make big companies, but usually like there's a bunch of exceptions, and that is the exception, because and the reality is people who build big companies are great leaders, and they work with people and they inspire people, and and again, going back to the difference between the founder and the CEO, like the people that are taking it public are leaders. So yeah, I think coachability is really important, and I think in the startup community we just get caught up on these like legacy business models, and we think that
what do you mean?
Well, like right now,
what is legacy business model?
Legacy business models, maybe even just legacy trends, or right now, let's just say there's a rush towards conversational AI.
Oh yeah, so much.
Right, and because there's this unicorn, OpenAI. Well, OpenAI is a unicorn, right? Like they've accomplished that, right? And there's people rushing to go get into this space when effectually it's over, right? And I think there are big steps in AI to come, and unstructured AI, but the next unicorn is not going to be a conversational AI platform, in my opinion. And because we already have that, and it's figured out, and they're going to keep growing, and they're still just getting started, but like the race is won. And so you got to look beyond it, right? And so many people in the startup community chase these trends. And a year ago it was Web3, right? And a year before that it was who knew,
right,
the pandemic, right? And it was chasing the pandemic and what opportunities came out of the pandemic. And then a year before that it was VR, AR, right? And but it's usually these trends come because there's big companies that have made a breakthrough and have been working on this space for 10 years, and they've built the unicorn already, and now it's enabled. And you're at the application layer at that point, meaning that people are building applications on OpenAI, which can be very strong businesses and create a lot of cash flow and transform companies. I don't think it's you can't be, that doesn't mean it's a unicorn, right? I'm not saying there's not, maybe there might be a unicorn built on top of OpenAI, but like it's not because it just does the chatbot thing well, right? Or it's not just because it uses OpenAI in like
I know exactly
one
what you meant.
specific way. It's like maybe they like use OpenAI to like integrate with something else and add some other new idea on top of it, then okay, then maybe you have it. But and so it's like, and I think we try to get very comparative on these just early stage companies, and even just the milestones people look at of like, what have they accomplished and what are their valuation, and you really got to have a forward facing mentality and really have a view of the future that you're building into, and that has to be somewhat accurate of a hypothesis, and
understood,
and see where the puck is going, not where the puck is at, right? And because like that's the one place it won't be is where it's at now, and so
that's a great point.
It could be all these other places.
Yeah, so definitely that I call it shining subject symptom, where we are today. This, and I hear you point loud and clear that if right now it's already here, next it will be I don't want to say a moving target. It's not actually that way, but it feels like us we are tracing a trend rather than actually dedicate time and energy to recreate something meaningful.
Right. Yeah. And the trends, you can dig in, and there's a few, tier 2 winners in these trends.
But they're not tier 1.
They're not, they're not tier 1. Social media is another, well played out example of this, where you had Facebook and Twitter, in all of our hands, and everyone was using it, and yet people were still trying to start the next social media company. And you could even, this is a area where Silicon Valley could have diversified, and there are people that just say, like, for a long time, these, like in Silicon Valley, they were just building consumer apps, and they were really good at that, and they made a lot of money, and they could launch it. But the reality is those aren't that innovative anymore. And like the innovation has turned more industrial, supply chain focused, deep technology. And these are things that, California is not set up to build as easily as places like Texas or a lot of these other new startup ecosystems that are evolving.
And how do you compare the startup ecosystem in terms of the strengths and advantage, as you speak about Silicon Valley versus Austin versus other places?
Well,
even Silicon Valley to Austin, for example, how do you compare that? If people ask you, should I go to Silicon Valley, should I go to Austin? How do you answer that question?
Austin's more accessible. And I'm not going to say if you're going to put Silicon Valley startups on a field with Austin startups that Austin would beat those startups, but I can tell you, if you want to break into VC and break into startups, you want to come to Austin. And it's just it's earlier in its growth cycle as an ecosystem, and there very well may, and I hope will be, another growth cycle for Silicon Valley on the West Coast. But the reality is, in 2018-ish, the population of tech workers in San Francisco started to decrease. And which is the ultimate limiting factor on how many unicorns you can build, is like, how many people can you hire to work at the unicorns, right? And like that's why you have it in a certain city, because you're building, and so, Austin, there's a lot more room for growth on that. And there's so many people moving here, and they all, not all, but a lot of them work in tech, and a lot of them are educated, and a lot of them are moving here to get involved in the startup community and in tech. And so there's just way more, of a green field to work in here, versus Silicon Valley, which, has, is just a much more exclusive culture.
Yeah. So back to the investment piece, we talk about founders or teams who are maybe not as founder, but we talk about two things. We talk about, one, the uncoachable. Secondly, maybe tracing the fancy, the trend, all and above. Now let's talk about teams that are really exciting for you when it comes to raising capital, when it comes to funding, right? What are the top a few traits that you guys are looking at?
Yeah, I think it all routes back to trust with the team. And
so the people.
It's the people, and that's the one thing that's more important than a amazing high growing business, right? That, the business has a good idea. It's got a lot of great customers. But if you don't trust the people operating that company, it doesn't matter, right? And there's plenty of examples you can look at where there's people who took money from investors and they weren't trustworthy, right? And in VC and beyond. And so, and then it becomes, okay, how do you evaluate trust and how do you test trust? And working at a place that like Capital Factory is so community driven, and we have hundreds of mentors and hundreds of founders and investors we've worked with that we do trust. We have a trust network, and so if you send me someone when like, hey, this person's awesome, like I really like what they're doing, and I've worked with them before, and it's great. Like, okay, like we kind of trust this person from the start, right? And we kind of know who sends what type of deal flow. And like some people like will send us a lot of deal flow, and we still love to get introductions, but we just know like, oh, they don't maybe have as deep of a relationship as another mentor that only shares really trusted things. And then the other big thing for keeping trust for building trust is keeping your promises. And I recommend you start small instead of big with your promises, and instead of promising the world, like promise that you'll be on time, or promise that you'll send a follow-up email by the end of the day and do it.
I'm so adamant about this. Like when people tell me, okay, when I will do X, Y, Z after this, no problem, and nothing happens. It's just like, we just talk about this, or even send a follow email, but still nothing happened.
Right.
That for me is like, it's just such a big no-no.
This is your strike zone, and this is
100%.
why founders should talk with you, because there's a lot of just basics that are easy that can really create a huge false start. And
It's just who we are, right? We are all words. I really think that's such a big thing, and I love you said about start small, don't be that big.
Yeah, because you just ultimately, when you invest in a company, you need to understand the accuracy of the information you're getting from the CEO, and you can't go to a earnings report or, like you're just getting it from the CEO, and that's why it's risky. And, public investors, retail investors aren't able to do it because you have to have some type of accreditation status to participate, because it's risky. And so, and a lot of founders just go promise everything. And I don't even think they're realizing, like, if they say they're going to do something as a CEO of a company, they're promising it. Like if you say it's going to, and certainly there's like different levels of it, but if you don't qualify that statement and say, oh, this is just a pipe dream, we're not really going to do this, but this would be awesome, right? Then you start to like build this up, and all of a sudden as an investor, you just don't know what's fact or fiction. And like we're always kind of like incorporating a little bit of fiction and like little like creative fiction, I'd say, or just like creative nonfiction, where you're making it interesting and you may exaggerate a little bit, but you don't cross the line into an outright lie.
Yeah. That's a very important distinction, I think. I just recently watched the show, what is called We Quash. I don't know if you're watching it. Oh my God, you should. It's on Apple TV. It's talk about how we work, their story.
Oh, I did see it.
And I thought it was such a great... So watch it. I was curious to talk to you afterwards about the line between aspiration versus maybe not so much.
Right. Yeah. And it goes both ways.
100%.
With with WeWork, it's interesting.
We can talk more once you watch that.
Yeah. No, I have watched it now that I understand, and I am very familiar with the WeWork story. I misheard you. But yeah, I personally, I think there's a lot of blame that should be put on the investors that wasn't. And a lot of people focus on Adam Newman, and
I thought he's a dreamer.
He's a dreamer. And
I admire that. That's a lot of gut.
Right. He, this is an example of a company that grew faster than the CEO, and their CEO didn't find a new CEO that could do the job at the higher level.
Yeah.
And and that was permitted by the board. And yeah, and it's quite unfortunate because it goes back to the people around founders, not giving them the right help. And Adam Newman changed the way we work, and he created an incredible company that grew incredibly fast. And he really did more than most founders. And there's, I could count on 10 founders, 10, there's, right. And you look at absolute value, he grew, he crushed it. He was not a financial, person. And, so anyways, it's a community game. Mm-hmm. And, I think I would not take trust lessons from Adam Newman, but there is a bigger story that you can get into, and investors, maybe we're a little too trusting with him, and that's definitely part of the problem.
I mean, they always lesson everything everywhere, right? I don't think it's anything as simple as right or wrong. It just is. And I think one of the good things out of that is today the co-working space, co-working culture becomes so readily accessible for everybody, especially startup community and founders, which is something I really appreciate at Capital Factory. Right. And now I'm curious, Nick, with all that, right? You has been in Austin ecosystem for decades. Is it 2 decades now, if I count my math correctly?
Not quite 2. Almost 15 years. Yeah.
Well, that is quite some time. You've seen a lot. You've done a lot. And now I'm curious, what are you most excited about next, about the future?
The commercialization of outer space.
Wow, that's very specific.
There's some people who fall in love with the idea of outer space, and I did that somewhere along the line, just out of curiosity. And we are in a space race, and the United States is going to land on the moon this year for the first time in 1969. Just in our portfolio alone, 3 of our companies are funded as part of that mission.
Wow.
And one of them is a public company that you can invest in right now called Intuitive Machines, that is building the lander and a telecommunication system for the moon. And
incredible.
Yeah, and that's as venture capital of an industry as it gets, I think. And so I'm ready to rock.
I love that. I love that you have such a big mission and really rally the incredible founder technology towards that. That's really incredible to see. What do you personally want to leave on this planet with, Nick?
I don't know. Maybe it's what I want to leave off this planet. Going back to the space analogy.
I love that.
Yeah.
But what's specific though? When people say 100 years later or 200 years later, when people think about Nick Spiller, what do you want the legacy to be?
Maybe like one book.
Okay.
Like if 100 years from now, if I wrote a really good book that people look back on.
But what is that? What's the thing of the book?
Well, it's probably the story about Austin and its role in the startup community. And I think I'm nothing special, have no real technical capabilities, than
overrated,
anyone.
by the way.
And, but I've had, like I said, I'm an eyewitness to this, and I want to tell a story, and I'm still generally just witnessing and being part of the story and playing my little role on the team at Capital Factory. But
amazing.
Maybe it's a podcast, and who knows? Maybe it's a immortal AI version of myself and my consciousness that I leave and tells the story that way. But something like a book that today we see is there's the Adam Smith and Wealth of Nations, right? Great book, lasted for a long time, and it's the foundation of a whole way of thinking. And I don't know if maybe it's more of a lifestyle that my book would be about.
Does not matter. Gonna be you. That's all it matters, right?
It also doesn't matter because I won't be here, so I guess I don't think about it too much. But if you ask me, that's what I'd say.
Hey, you do you, whether it's an AI version of you, the book, the podcast, all in above, right? At the end of the day, I think you're going to be truly one of the incredible, I don't want to say legacy, but like a flagship that really helped put Austin, Texas on the map when we think about startup, when we think about startup ecosystems. And today, whether it's with the Capital Factory or anything beyond that, you really a group of superstars around you and made that happen. That's really incredible.
Well, I'm lucky to have you on my team of superstars saying nice things, and really appreciate being on your show and your platform and everything you do for our community. We get great feedback from founders who work with you, and I really appreciate your perspective and your method to helping them grow. And so yeah, it's excited to we'll see. I wonder when the last person will listen to this podcast episode, if that will be 5 years from now, 50 years from now, 1,000 years from now.
That's an interesting thought.
Yeah.
Huh?
When will the last person that listens to this episode listen to it?
And we will never know.
Not with the current physics. No.
Yeah, but I thought that's the beauty part, right? Oftentimes, life there are so wonders and there's so much unknowns, and that's what made life so exciting. And therefore, I just want to say, truly, sincerely, thank you, Nick. I have not done a show with friends for a long time on the show, and that just made me so happy. And just seeing you and seeing the truth coming out of you, seeing the passion, seeing all the incredible, the people, the passion, all in above. So truly, Nick, thank you for being here today. I'm so appreciate you.
Thank you, Wen. I had a blast.
Me too. And thank you everybody for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I do. And I cannot wait to see you all next week. Bye, guys.